is fragile and tenuous. When you were younger, how many of you thought you were invincible? Many of us still do, I think. As teenagers, we have that mindset, it won't happen to me. What we don't realize is how easily it can happen to us, how fragile we are as humans, that all it takes is one sip, just one too many, mere ounces of water in the lungs too much. That was a quotation from one of my favorite essays, Autopsy Report by Leo Purpura. Today, I'm going to be exploring how this essay, along with another prose nonfiction essay, Blue Pastures by Mary Oliver, supports this idea that life is fragile and that it can be ended so quickly, so easily. It may not seem like it, but our bodies are incredibly delicate. In Blue Pastures, Oliver expresses this idea of the fragility of the physical, in her description of a fish corpse wasting away. Their soft, white belly skin is plucked open in an hour by the rapacious beaks of the gulls, but their cartilage frames waste away slowly. The phrase, their soft, white belly skin, makes use of the adjectives soft and white, which have connotations of delicacy, innocence, purity. The adjective soft implies that the fish is easily opened, that it is not protected, it is exposed. Notice the phrase, plucked open in an hour. The fact that it can be plucked open so quickly and so easily is indicative of its fragility. The fact that it can be ripped apart so easily, so quickly, clearly demonstrates how fragile their physical shell is. The phrase, but their cartilage frames waste away slowly, is a reminder of what remains after the fish have been fed upon. We also see this as a reminder that the physical side of the fish continues to be destroyed even after the fish itself has died. It continues to waste away, indicating once again that nothing lasts forever. Nothing is invincible, like we may believe. Similarly, in Autopsy Report, Purpura repeatedly remarks on the fragility of the body, observing throughout the essay how easily the body opens. And I've seen how easily we open, our skin not at all the boundary we're convinced of, as we bump into each other and excuse ourselves. I've seen how small a thing gone wrong may be. One sip, just one too many, mere ounces of water in the lungs too much. Purpura contradicts our belief that our bodies are strong and that they can protect us. She suggests that our skin is not a boundary to protect us, as this metaphor implies, but that it is so delicate that it is incredibly easy to cut open, as Purpura observed while watching these autopsies. The fragility of our bodies is also highlighted with the auditory imagery in the description, crackings and snappings, the whisking and shushing of knives over skin, a sound like tearing silk. The diction, cracking and the snappies, with this diction, Purpura vividly describes the sounds of the body being torn apart. The verbs whisking and shushing have calming effects, indicating how easily the doctors were able to cut the body open. The simile, a sound like tearing silk, uses the noun silk to compare the body to something beautiful and delicate, something that can be ripped apart as easily as the fabric. We deem the human body so untouchable, but this couldn't be further from the truth. As Oliver and Purpura have demonstrated, we are so incredibly fragile that our physical shell can be destroyed in an instant. Let's think about fish for a second. When you're at a restaurant and you have a piece of fish in front of you, what do you think about? Do you think about the life this fish led, the relationships it had, the mark it left on the world? No. You look at this piece of fish, and to you it's only a product, something that's sole purpose in life is to be eaten. Its life has no value to you because it's more useful when it's dead. This is exactly the point that Oliver addresses through her descriptions of fish in Blue Pastures. She objectifies them by describing them only as a food product, using no emotive diction to reflect on their lives and give them value. Instead, she remarks only on their use as food. The flounder makes a pretty supper. Notice how in this short, effective sentence, Oliver creates only a visual description of the flounder, referring to it as pretty. In addition, she objectifies the flounder, referring to it as a supper to demonstrate that it is a food product to be eaten, not a living creature with value. This is further exemplified in Oliver's description of an octopus. They taste like chicken, but richer by far, the taste of 5 chickens in each tubular body. This gustatory imagery clearly describes the taste of the octopus, using metaphor to compare its taste to that of 5 chickens. However, it describes only the taste. Once again, Oliver objectifies the octopus as a tubular body, and only treats it as food, as something to be consumed. There's a similar use of the lexical field of food in Autopsy Report. Purpura vividly describes the bodies with figurative language comparing organs and tissues to food. When the bodies are first opened up, Purpura observes the the organs as a cornucopia of dripping fruits. This metaphor compares the organs of the body to a classic symbol of abundance and nourishment. This is also seen in the descriptions. There were the yellow layers of fat, yellow as a cartoon sun, as sweet cream butter, laid thinly on some, in slabs on others. There were the transparent, the small sloshing stomach transparent to be drained, and the mitral valves sealing like the lids of ice cream cups. These metaphors compare the human body to food parts, to food items, in order to lessen the horror and thus the importance of the autopsy. The beautiful visual imagery she creates using these descriptions are far removed from the grotesque, horrifying scenario that we would picture at the thought of a human corpse being cut open. Purpur's descriptive tone appears light and calm, leading the reader to believe that there is nothing jarring or shocking about a dead human body. Her irreverence towards the weight of a human life leads us to believe the same, and we do not consider the implications of the life of a person. Their death means nothing to us, just as is the case with the fish in blue pastures. When you think about it, even though death scares us as humans, most of us have come to accept it because it's inevitable. Death is a part of the cycle of nature. We are born, we live, and we die. In Blue Pastures, Oliver expounds upon this idea of the natural cycle of life. In her descriptions of the fish she finds. In the sentence, "So does mackerel, a squamation of snow, midnight, and the blue of a stormy sky." Oliver uses single-word metaphors to create beautiful visual images reflective of nature. Snow and midnight have positive connotations, creating a beautiful description of the fish, while the phrase of the blue of a stormy sky references a common and powerful occurrence in nature, a storm. Using this description, Oliver creates an effect of majesty. We view the dead fish not as an appalling image, but rather as a beautiful and powerful one that is reflective of nature itself. Oliver also develops the idea of nature through her description of setting. In this description, the phrase cold gray light makes use of light and temperature to create an image of the surroundings. The adjectives cold and gray have connotations of mystery and peace, implying that the process of catching and preparing the fish is almost sacred, a ritual in a sense. This is clearly indicative of the cycle of nature, as Oliver views the preparation of the fish through the lens of nature and adds a certain reverence to the scene. The cycle of life is also apparent in this instance. Oliver slices open a fish, only to discover that its stomach is full of yet smaller fish. To die is to truly become a part of nature. The cycle of eating and being eaten is so clearly apparent, conveying the idea that death is natural and inevitable. In Autopsy Report, Purpur also suggests that death is natural, primarily through her use of a calm tone throughout the passage, with phrases such as, "It was familiar to see the body opened," and "What stepped forth unbidden was calm." The personification of calm in this phrase, with the verb stepped, indicates that Purpur was as taken aback by the familiarity of the situation as the readers. Instead of the shock or horror to be expected with death, a sense of calm prevails. With these descriptions and relaxed tone, Purpur contradicts the idea we have of death. It is not something to be feared, but rather something that comes naturally and easily. These three aspects come together: the fragility of the physical, the value of the end product over the life of an organism, and the idea of death as natural, to convey this idea: life is fragile and tenuous. Although it is inevitable, these works show us that it is not something to be feared. Yes, the physical can be destroyed so easily, but it is simply a part of the cycle of nature. So no, we're not invincible, but will we ever really want to be?
Okay, we can have the lights on while we ask some questions. Does anyone have any questions that you want to ask Margaret about her argument, about what she was talking about, or more information about each of the essays, or what sort of things? I'm kind of curious as to the process, because when you first started your investigation, it was sort of like, oh, well, I see these some similarities between the lexical fields that are being employed in each of the essays, and that was sort of your, I guess, initial line of inquiry that you were following, and then it's sort of evolved into this. So if you could sort of talk a little bit about that process, and then maybe the breadcrumbs that you sort of, I don't know, that led you towards how you decided to organize it in this way.
Yeah. So for my analysis, I wanted to focus on food, definitely, because that's what I noticed was common in both essays. And when I was investigating, I realized the way they used food was different than I originally thought. So for Blue Pastures, it wasn't so much as she was describing the fish with gustatory imagery. It was she was treating the fish only like they were food, not like they had a value or a life or anything. So I thought that was interesting. I didn't really know how that tied in yet. But then I also looked at it in an autopsy report, and there she more clearly used food imagery and all that. And I thought it served the same purpose, but she did it a little bit differently. So the way she describes it, comparing it to food, makes us more comfortable with it. Like we're not scared that human bodies are being sliced open. It seems natural to us. So I sort of tied it in with death there in the cycle of life, that it's natural for things to die, and then here that life has no value, which is a little dark, but yeah, that was the conclusion I kind of drew from that. Yeah, it was interesting to see how everything sort of tied in once I started going deeper and analyzing more.
Right, because your analysis sort of almost turned into more of an analysis of like common themes and this sort of bigger thread that sort of connected the two.
Yeah.
But what you were doing was really looking at it. You were using all of this information about the lexical field, the word choice, the imagery, the metaphor, language use, and how those different things are like adding up to sort of meet in these sort of bands that connect the two essays, which I think is really, really interesting. Does anybody else have anything you want to ask? Yeah, Jacob.
What was your inspiration behind exploring this subject?
This subject of these two essays, or the subject of
sort of like
life
that life is fragile and tenuous.
Life is fragile and tenuous. I think that was mostly from my analysis. I sort of discovered that as the common theme, the idea that both authors were trying to express. I think so. Through my analysis, that was basically where I started to realize that both of the essays were not really as much about describing fish and cool autopsies, you know, being cut open, but they had more of a point to them, which makes sense because they're prose nonfiction essays. You know, they're trying to prove a point through a story.
Right.
So,
well,
yeah,
I think it's cool that choosing these two, because they stylistically there are some things that they're doing really in a similar way. Like I think just on the level of the word and the level of the sentence, they're both really poetic in terms of the styles that they're written in. They're very sort of contemplative, and they have a similar tone throughout, which is what you kind of pulled out. But their themes, they're not as didactic in the rhetoric as something like Living Like Weasels, where she's making like, this is my thesis that I am arguing, and here are my examples and my anecdote that's proving it. It's much more subtle in terms of the message that's being conveyed and the way, the vehicles by which they're sort of getting there. One, nature and fish, and one, the body and this very personal experience with the body. There's sort of two different ways to sort of achieve the same ends with it, which I think is really cool. And it's all sort of hidden. Like you have to dig through all of that to sort of
get that. It made me understand the essays in a different way.
Yeah.
Because at first I picked both of these out because I loved them, the beautiful images they created. Both of their imagery is amazing, and I loved that. And then now that I see sort of the purpose of that, it totally changed my view on what they were about.
Right, and you can see sort of why the choices were made, why the writer was making the sort of choices in order to convey and create this sort of attitude towards the subject. Like you're saying, Blue Pastures, this is kind of a morbid idea, like the body, death is inevitable and the body is kind of just serving this purpose, but it doesn't come off as morbid when you first read it, because it's sort of couched in this beautiful package. So I think you did a really good job of sort of conveying those things. You can stop the tape if you want.